I finished Mario and Luigi Brothership. At this point, it was a few weeks ago. Took me a little while to get around to recording this, but I'm going to chat about it. First of all, there are going to be some spoilers in here. Definitely, mainly gameplay spoilers. I'm not going to get too much into like the specifics of the story and stuff, so if you're really caring about the story beats of a Mario and Luigi game, I might not get into it too much. I don't know. I only have a loose outline for this, but there's definitely going to be like gameplay spoilers and stuff if that's something you care about. So, I beat the game. I liked it. I liked it a lot, actually. I enjoyed myself throughout most of the game, which I was really happy to see, because the last new Mario and Luigi game was Paper Jam, and that was like in 2015, I think. So that was like 9 years ago, and I remember playing that. I was in high school at the time, and I just remember playing it and just being like, wow, like this is just so boring. It just didn't feel like it had any of the charm of a Mario and Luigi game. And luckily, Brothership definitely has that charm. Now, there are some noticeable faults with the game, and that was very apparent leading up to it coming out. Like, there was that IGN review that just gave it just such a horrible score, which I think is a little overkill. But yeah, it has faults. It has some of the trappings that Dream Team was criticized for. I just replayed Dream Team right before Brothership came out, and it has some of the same issues. The opening is a little slow. It takes a little bit to get into the game. The stopping and constant tutorials and people just talking at you nonstop, like not letting you just play the game, that definitely was a thing in this game, which is annoying. But I was kind of able to look past it because I was already kind of used to it from Dream Team. But yes, that is a very valid criticism of the game, I think. There was more backtracking in it than I maybe would have preferred, but every Mario and Luigi game kind of has that to an extent, where towards the end of the game, there's just a bunch of backtracking. It really wasn't that bad in this game. It was pretty enjoyable, all things considered. One of the biggest problems is just, everyone commented on this, but it's just the performance issues. And it really is just a problem of it being on the Nintendo Switch at this point. Am I convinced that this game probably could have been optimized to actually run more smoothly on the Switch? Yes. At the same time, it's such a consistent issue with a lot of releases, even Nintendo's first-party releases at this point, that it's hard to criticize it fully, especially when the next system is about to come out, and presumably is going to have performance enhancements for Switch games. This is a big assumption. For the record, at the time I'm recording this, the Switch 2 has not been shown off, but I am recording this at the very end of December of 2024, so I know that could change by the time I upload this. I don't know when I'm uploading it. But yeah, performance issues. They did exist, and it wasn't a huge issue, but like I could tell little hiccups even early on. I'm like, yeah, like it's not a consistent frame rate. That said, it did get worse throughout the game. Towards the end of the game, there's some stuff that happens, like Ship-Shape Island starts having some particle effects on it, and even just all the islands like that are really just adding into the atmosphere, and they look cool, but good lord, the Switch cannot handle it. Like it is so clearly struggling. You know, I'd use the rolling bros move to move about Ship-Shape Island, and I'm going so fast through everything, and just the Switch so clearly cannot handle what it's being thrown. So I'm hoping, I would like to replay this at some point, or at least hop into it for a little bit when the Switch 2 comes out. So I'm hoping, if not like a performance patch being on there, definitely just an inbuilt mechanism in the Switch 2 to make Switch 1 games run better, like uncapping the frame rate a little bit. But yeah, definitely the performance issues are noticeable. In battle, it was never a problem for me. The performance issues are only in the overworld, and it really is just a visual thing. It does bother me. I like consistent frame rates in my games. I had the same problem with Echoes of Wisdom, but hopefully that's a problem we're gonna leave behind when the next Switch comes around. But while we're on the presentation, I mean, performance issues aside, the bland presentation that was in Paper Jam, that like sterilized, homogeneous Mario presentation, is just completely gone. It feels like this game is a Mario and Luigi game again, which is just so amazing, because the last one that really felt like that was Dream Team, which, granted, I haven't played the remakes that got released on the 3DS yet, but those are remakes, so of course they're going to feel like Mario and Luigi games. It just, everything is so stylized. The colors on Mario and Luigi are stylized, the big outlines, just the bold colors and character designs. It's awesome. It feels so great that it feels like a Mario and Luigi game again. But at that same time, it feels almost like a reboot of the series. It doesn't really reference a lot from the past games. It's the first game in the series since Superstar Saga to go back to just playing as Mario and Luigi with no gimmick, you know, because even Dream Team had like Dreamy Luigi, and it just straight up, you're just playing as Mario and Luigi. And it feels really compact in a way. I don't know exactly how to describe it, but it feels kind of like Superstar Saga, where it's just kind of its own thing. And that's kind of cool, especially because it is a new team working on the game. So I kind of get it. It's just kind of its own, like, it is a Mario and Luigi game, and there's occasional references to the past games, but it mostly is just like they're kind of almost restarting, which is fine because it's been so long since Paper Jam. I think it makes sense. It's also distinct. It looks distinctly different from the previous games in the series, which I think is really important. It's one of the big things that Paper Jam and the remakes were criticized for, is that they reused some of the same assets and stuff from Dream Team, which I've looked at all the games. They don't look exactly like Dream Team. They do put in effort to differentiate them, but that's one of the great things about the first 4 games in the series, is that they all have very distinctly different looks while also being able to look like a Mario and Luigi game. And I think that kind of thing is really important to capture, because Partners in Time and Bowser's Inside Story were on the same system, but they still look different from each other. And I think that getting that right was really important to me, at least. And Brothership definitely, while it is a Mario and Luigi game, it doesn't look like any other game in the series. It has its own style to it. The game just pops. Aside from the performance issues, everything in the game looks so cool. It's so colorful and bright, and it's so loud at you in a way that even the older games just never were, which isn't a bad thing. It's just different. There's just so much funk and charm to everything. It's so cool. All the areas are very recognizable, and super colorful, like Twisty Island with all the big colorful trees. You get Heat Freeze, and then like Slip and Glide, and the other Fire Island I'm forgetting the name of, but I mean, those are they're just like the contrasting cold and heat is very interesting to look at. You got like a lot of coins, which has the big corporate aesthetic, and I don't know, there's just, every area just felt so distinct, which Concordia feels very much like its own place. It feels like a really expansive, well thought out world, even though you're jumping around all these different islands, which also is really cool. I think it's a really unique take on the series, because in the past, these games have connected maps to one another, whereas in this game, it's a bunch of islands that you use like a world map to get to. And it's different, but I actually kind of like it, because the islands are pretty small, but it allows there to be so much visual variety in the islands. You go to so many different looking places that it makes the game feel more interesting. Like, you never know what you're going to uncover next. And it's a nice flavor change from the expansive areas of the other games. You just get so much more variety, which you do lose that sense of everything being connected. But at least for a one-off mechanic, I think it works pretty well. Along with the visual elements of the islands, the character designs are also super fun. They're all themed around different plugs and stuff, which is definitely a big thing the Mario and Luigi games like to do, is kind of have like a consistent theming with all the characters. But like the electricity theme, it's very cute. You know, all the character designs, they're very enjoyable to look at. And all the enemies too, they're all just like really sweet looking. You still get like normal Mario enemies like Goombas and stuff are there, but all the little plug enemies, they all look really cute. You know, I definitely have no complaints there. It definitely adds to the game having its own identity. The world is also really fun to traverse too. The bros attacks they feel really great. A lot of them are just reused from the older games, but they're repurposed in a way that definitely makes them more interesting. Like, instead of doing the tornado move that you usually get, where you just have Luigi jump on Mario or whichever way around it is and you just twirl, you turn into like a whole like UFO, and then they let you use that to like suck things up. You get the bros ball attack, but you can also use it to like move super fast. And then they add in like the fire and ice flowers for Mario and Luigi, which it would have been cool if Luigi got his electricity powers back from Superstar Saga. But, you know, they brought back the elemental abilities at all, which is cool. But they did them in a different way, where you get to throw giant mixed fire and ice balls. And I don't know. It's just all of the bros moves in the overworld. They just feel really nice to use. But speaking of nice to use, oh my gosh, the battles feel so good. Every single time that I jumped on an enemy or hit an enemy with a hammer, like the 500th time I did that felt just as good as the first time I did that. The sound effects are so bright and colorful, and there's just such a weight to every single hit that you do in the game, which I think is really important for a turn-based RPG. Everything just has to feel really good because you are doing a lot of the same thing over and over. And the bros attacks especially, it feels like you are just nuking every single thing you hit with a bros attack. There's some of them have like unique animations, like the Yoshi one where just Yoshi like comes and slams down. And I don't know. I think that they all feel really amazing to hit, and the animations do a lot of work to help that. There's tons of body bending and stretching and breaking, and it really it helps. I mean, it's very animated and cartoony, but it really helps sell the impact. The one thing I did not like about how the battles felt is something I saw a lot of people complain about, which is that Luigi's menus are no longer controlled with B, which sounds like such a small complaint. Like, it sounds like such like a privileged complaint. Like, who cares? Who cares if Luigi's menus aren't like controlled with B, you know? But I didn't realize how important it was until his menus weren't controlled with B. Because when I first noticed it, I was like, oh, that's weird, they changed it. Luigi's menus are controlled with A in battle, which I was like, okay, that's fine. I'm just used to it being controlled with B because that's what I grew up doing. That's what I've done with all the games. I just replayed a bunch of the games, so I was used to that. But I never really got used to it throughout the game. I kind of did, but not really, because there's a natural flow to Luigi's attacks when you menu with B, because you use B for Luigi. So in the old games, you would run forward after pressing B with Luigi's hammer icon, and then you would swing Luigi's hammer with B. Your thumb was already there. In this game, you select Luigi's hammer icon with A, and then you swing with B. And it feels weird. Especially early on, I missed some attacks because I just was not used to having to move my thumb. And it's such a small thing, and like you can kind of get used to it, but it's better that his menus are controlled with B. It's a weird change. There's no objective improvement in my mind to him being controlled with A. So that was weird. It doesn't take away overall from the game a ton, but it was a weird change. And along with that, I mean, it's just one of the minor things in the game that could have been improved, because battles overall just feel great. Especially the bros attacks are super fun. They're very creative. Most of them are completely new ideas, but even the ones that aren't, they switch them up, you know, because they bring back the jump helmet from Bowser's Inside Story, and instead of doing it exactly like that game did, now it's 3D. And the red shell came back, but instead of having it be just a variation of the green shell, now you kick it between the brothers, and it adds just a little bit of differences to some of the familiar attacks, which is really nice. And some of them are they're really cool. Some of the end game ones get really involved, like the fire and ice tornado is super fun, and the one where you're connecting the planets with the plug. I mean, there's an argument to be made that maybe that takes too long, but they're really creative. And there's a lot of variety in how they attack things. So I found myself using a lot of the attacks intermittently throughout the whole game. Like, I just finding myself using all 10 of them. I also still like the setup where each bro gets their own bros attacks, because that's how it was in Superstar Saga, and then that was brought back in Dream Team. And even though, like, Bowser's Inside Story is my favorite game in the series, I do prefer this approach, with each brother having their own bros attack, because it differentiates them a little bit on each turn rather than being carbon copies of each other than stats. So I do like that approach. What I don't like is that the bros attacks are just given to you throughout the story. I like in Bowser's Inside Story and Dream Team when you have to search for them a little. Every once in a while, they're just given to you. Sometimes you'll search for like 5 of them, and the rest of the pieces will be given to you. So it wasn't like all in or all out, but I wish that I could have found some of the bros attacks, you know? Especially because the islands are so fun to explore and look around. It would have been nice to hide some pieces in there. And on top of that, there were no optional bros attacks, which I think is just... That was a small thing that I really liked to get in the older games. Is like, yeah, I can miss bros attacks, but it's cool to go back and get them. And I don't know. It's fine. It's fine that they just give them to you, but I do prefer that I have to earn them a little bit sometimes, you know? I also don't think it's out of the question to say that maybe there could have been more bros attacks, because there's 10, which is about how many every game has, but this is the 6th mainline entry in the series. I don't think it's out of the question to say that they could add like 2 more, just to add a little bit of variety, especially because this game is a lot longer than the other games. I mean, I think by the end I was reaching like 45 hours, which I did a bunch of the quests and stuff too, but this game was long. I think it would have been okay to add in some more bros attacks, because it did feel like there were large gaps of time where you would just not find any, and then they would just give you 2. It was a little odd, but they were very fun to use. I have no complaints about them in battle. The other thing that was really fun, the boss battles, which is pretty consistent with all the Mario and Luigi games. All the boss battles were really fun. I really like the Luigi logic attacks that were put into those battles where, you know, midway through, depending on how you counter certain attacks, it sets something up. So Luigi can set up like a little mini game, and it's like a mini bros attack fit into a specific boss battle, and they were really fun. Like, they didn't really break the pace of the game. I really liked them. The boss battles were super fun. Especially my favorite, which this is kind of a spoiler, but Gloam Bowser was super, super fun. Just having to figure out how his attacks all worked together. Those were great. But this leads into what I think is the biggest problem of the game. As great as those boss fights are, there's barely any of them. There's like no boss fights in the whole game. I haven't even looked at the total count. In fact, I'm actually going to real quick. So I just looked it up, and Mario and Luigi Brothership has 16 bosses throughout its main story run, and Bowser's Inside Story has around 20. It kind of just depends on what you consider a boss, especially because some of the bosses are fragmented. So it's not significantly less than like the previous games, but for how much bigger the game is, it feels like a lot less. It shouldn't be less at all, but for how much bigger it is, there should be way more fights in this game. There's so many times you reach a section of the story and it feels like, oh, I'm about to fight a big boss, and then nothing happens. Especially with the extension cores, like those guys, you fight one of them on their own, and then you fight all of them at the end of the game, and it just feels like so many times like you should have been fighting those guys. And I don't even think it would have been out of the question to have a boss fight at the end of every island. Not even every island had a boss fight. It really was so odd. It feels like in the old games, you're getting boss fights thrown at you non-stop, and they're always the best parts of the game. So it's a really baffling misstep to not have all of these boss fights. And then on top of that, there's barely any optional fights either, because, you know, Bowser's Inside Story, I just said, it has like 20 fights, but pretty much all of those have challenge versions in the challenge room too. And that's some of what was so great about the later Mario and Luigi games like Dream Team and even Paper Jam. There were so many great optional fights that you could do throughout the game that you'd unlock, including super bosses at the end, because Bowser's Inside Story has Bowser X, and that fight is hard. And Dream Team and Paper Jam have their own. I think it's Bowser Jr. and Dry Bowser, which I've never fought yet. I'm going to get to them at some point. But, like, those are great fights. They're super fun. And Brothership has 3 optional battles. Like, they repeat 3 of the older enemies, and those fights are great, and then they just stop giving them to you. There's no super boss. There's no other optional fights. It's such a massive oversight in the game. It feels almost like they just didn't have enough time to make the fights, which is so weird because those boss fights are, like, the most important parts of the game. And I think with the variety of enemies in general, there's definitely a sense that it's a little rushed, because as great as the enemy designs are, a lot of them just get repeated throughout the game, and then they all get Gloam versions later on, which is just the same enemies but harder, which isn't to say that these games haven't reused enemies later on before, but it felt a little more prevalent this time around. It didn't feel like the enemy variety was a huge focus of theirs, and I think that it should be going forward. The last big thing about the battles that I want to talk about is the plug system. I'm a little mixed on it. I think it's a cool idea. It replaces the badges from Bowser's Inside Story and Dream Team, and then the cards from Paper Jam. I didn't forget about those. First of all, they're a lot better than the cards from Paper Jam. The cards just were not that interesting in my opinion. But I think the plugs are a cool idea. You get to mix them around and just add in these little like spices to the battle. It adds just a little bit more strategy. They're very cool, and some of the plugs even have unique combinations with each other that do extra things, which I think is a really cool idea. The problem is that they are so busted, and it's really easy to figure out how to break them. Some of the earliest combinations I found these out the moment I got these. You have the auto plugs that automatically use an item when you need them to. And then if you combine that with the boomerang items plug, you're using items for free without even spending a turn. Like, you can, depending on some of the setups, you could run out of bros points, and then just a syrup jar will automatically get used. And if you have the deluxe auto plug, you can get like a max syrup jar and then completely fill out your BP, and then you just get it back with the boomerang's item badge. It breaks so easily. And then the bros boost plus the reward afterwards, where you just are like doubling the attack power of all your bros attacks for no extra cost, is just super insane. I actually used that at the end of the game, and I two-shot the first phase of the final boss, which is insane. Like, Recluso was just not a challenge for me at the end because the badges were so good. And what makes them even better is that you get so many slots. You start off the game and you get like 2 plug slots, and you're like, okay, that's cool. I get to figure out which 2 plugs I want to use. And then you get a third one, and you're like, okay, cool, now I get 3. And now I get to have this strategy, because you have so many plugs at that point. It's like, I got to figure out the strategies. How do I use 3 different plugs to the best of my ability? And that's pretty fun. And then you get a 4th slot and a 5th slot, and it's just like, oh my gosh, like, you constantly have so many plugs you can put in there. You always have some recharging, but there's always some other broken one to add in, and they're so overpowered. It's so easy to abuse them, and especially in a game that doesn't have a bunch of really powerful optional bosses like the older ones. It just, they feel way too overtuned. The idea of it's really cool, but in practice they just start to trivialize stuff. And I tweeted this out when I finished the game. If I replay this game, I'm gonna play them without the plugs, because there were times when I'd be doing a battle and I'd be getting hit by stuff. Like, some of the fights are hard, which is what I like about these games, is that some of the fights later on get hard, but they didn't end up being hard because the plugs just covered every single mistake that I made. An entire bro can get knocked down, but if I have the auto 1-up and the boomerang items badge, it's like I can't even lose, So, definitely mixed on the plugs. I wouldn't mind if a similar system came back in the next game, but I definitely think they need to adjust it. I feel like the badges were a lot more balanced, even though they could definitely set up for some really broken stuff. They definitely still felt more balanced to me. One more thing about the setup of the game I do want to discuss is that quests are tracked in this game, which I think is really great, because there are like different quests you can do in the previous games. Solving different puzzles and even doing those boss refights are kind of considered quests, but they were never really tracked by the game. There was nothing writing down like, hey, here's all these fun things you can do. You kind of have to explore and find them yourself, and there is some merit to that. But I think it's better to have quests be tracked in an RPG. Most RPGs track quests for a reason, so you don't lose track of them as time goes on, and so that you don't miss any of the optional stuff if you want to do it. And I think, importantly, it also tells you when some of the quests are time sensitive, like when you have to complete them before the story moves on, and I think that's really great. The quests themselves were also they were actually really fun. Most of them were pretty short, so you kind of just go in, revisit some of the old areas, do the quest, and then you're done. And then you kind of get back to the main game. So I thought they were paced really well. Having those extra fights, as few as there were, be included in quests also encouraged me to do the fights at a time when they would still be challenging. Because I think that's one of the problems that some of the earlier games have, is those refights are really great, but a lot of the times I wouldn't end up doing them until the end of the game because I'd kind of just forget they're there. And then when I do them, I'm just super over leveled and only the super boss is difficult. So getting to fight the more difficult optional fights as they became available was really great, and I think I can owe it to the fact that the game told me that those fights were available through the quest system. So I definitely hope they keep tracking the quests going forward. I think it's a great change. So I want to hop into the story next, and it's an interesting thing to talk about because Mario and Luigi games, they're still Mario games. So the stories aren't anything crazy complicated, but I think the reason they're interesting is because they are more complicated than the average Mario story. I think that's what a lot of people find enjoyable about them, including myself. Especially the stories like Partners in Time and Bowser's Inside Story have much deeper stories and characterizations than you would find in a normal Mario game. And Brothership's story is fine. It's very serviceable. The best thing about it is that there's a decent number of memorable characters that get introduced throughout the story, and the game really leans into that. Zocket is a serviceable antagonist. He has a cool design. He's not very active in the story, so it's hard to really feel like he has much of a personality compared to someone like Fawful, who constantly shows up through Bowser's Inside Story. And I mean, Fawful is a hard comparison to make, but I gotta do it because he is the golden standard. And Zocket's fine. And then the twist with Zocket, which, spoilers, I guess, for those who care, the twist that he is Connie's mentor is definitely unexpected, but it kind of doesn't mean much because Zocket's not very involved in the story, and there's nothing really telegraphing that Connie's mentor is Zocket, so it kind of just comes out of nowhere, and it's not fully explained why that happened. And it kind of just serves to set up Reclusa as the final antagonist of the game. And Reclusa is fun. I liked his design, I like the personality, but he doesn't get enough time to be evil. He just kind of kicks the game into its climax, and he does a fine job with that. It really, the villains, they're nothing amazing, but they're not horrible. They do exactly what they need to do. And the story does a good enough job of stringing all the events together, about as well as the previous games do. There's not always like a logical reason why you're going to one area over the other. It's sort of just like a character thinking like, oh, maybe we should go here to find this thing, and it works just fine. It's all you really need for a Mario RPG. The bonds message is just beaten over your head in this game. They talk constantly about the power of bonds and love and friendship and whatever. But, it's easy to criticize, but it's well-intentioned and sweet. And it doesn't even feel like an ass pull because, like I said, there are a lot of fun characters throughout the story. Like, you get Idle, the Idle kids, which I'm indifferent to them, but they're sweet enough. Peach is really cool, and the stuff she does with them is very heartwarming. Snoutlet is great. He's like the complete opposite of Starlo, which I think was a really good call, because I think some people were getting tired of having Starlo around, especially because she was just so mean to Luigi, and I know that's the joke, and it's kind of funny, but when it keeps happening, it stops being funny. And Snoutlet kind of is just the opposite. He's not sassy. He's a little sassy, but he's just upbeat and energetic, and he loves Luigi. He stays in Luigi's hat. So it's like, it very much feels intentional that Snoutlet is not Starlo. Starlo is in the game, but she's just a side character with Peach. So it felt very intentional that they moved on from Starlo. Connie is great. There's something very simple about her, but she's very sweet. You like seeing her go through the game and wanting to find her mentor. It's very easy. There's other memorable characters. The Great Conductor's pretty funny. Chilliam and Bernadette are just like, they're just hopelessly in love with each other, and it's stupid, but it's also like, how could you be upset with them? Bowser Jr. and Buddy, that's also another one where it's just, they're so sweet. How could you not want them to be friends with each other? And then the Extension Core, X10 and Shun, which is stupid, but whatever. Like, they're fun. They're fun villains. they could have had more screen time, but they're fun. All the characters are fun. There's nothing complex about most of them, but you still get to interact with all of them, and you get to have the fun Mario and Luigi writing, and you know, there's nothing to complain about really. And I think that's why the Bonds message works so well, is because it introduces you to all of these characters beforehand and all of the different bonds that they have, and then at the end when you're trying to gather the bonds as the ability, which is so like on the nose, it still works because you're revisiting these characters that you've noticed have built the bond throughout the game. And I think that it does work for that reason. It's not an original story, but it's very heartwarming. But on the sense of characters and bonds, there is a standout pair of characters in this game, and it's Mario and Luigi. They interact so much. They still have their like gibberish language, but they talk to each other constantly, and they say each other's names all the time, and in the bros attacks, you know, they're high-fiving each other, and even in the normal attacks, like, they're helping each other out with the hammer and jump attacks, and just everything that they do together in this game, it really makes you believe their bond. Like, it makes you think, yeah, Mario and Luigi themselves really care about each other. And I think these games have always done a great job of characterizing Luigi very well. And I think this is the first game that really makes Mario feel like a really distinct character. And it's mainly through his role as one of the two Mario brothers. And that title, Brothership, is very accurate to the game. It very much feels like Mario and Luigi's bond was a big focus by the development team, which is great. The game obviously has its silly Mario and Luigi charm, just like the old games, which is great. The landing cutscenes where Luigi is progressively getting better and better at landing, but he starts out just like slamming into the ground or landing in the water or whatever. It's very funny. Luigi taking off his disguise to drink the juice. You know, it has its trademark Mario and Luigi charm. There's nothing really new or special added to it, but it's fun. I think overall, though, the game is missing something that I have been describing as the special sauce. It's this weird energy that the old Mario and Luigi games have that this new one just doesn't have yet. It's a combination of a couple of the things I've already talked about, like the missing bosses, the antagonists being a little boring. The game's a little bit too linear feeling, like there's not as much exploration. It's very easy to figure out what to do. It's a little too easy. So that leans into this special sauce thing. But it's also missing kind of like an edge, you know? It's not that the older games were edgy games, but it felt like they had a little bit more of an edge to them than a standard Mario game. And while the art style and presentation of this game definitely feels like it has that, the world and characters does not feel like it has that. And I think if this was a longer, more scripted review, I definitely could try to dive into exactly what that special sauce is in these Mario and Luigi games. But I feel like for the people who have played the older games and are also playing this one, I kind of feel like you get it, you know? Because I was talking with my younger sibling about this game, and they agree that it's missing that little something that really ties it together, and it's difficult to figure out exactly what it is. I wish I could say it more deliberately what it was, but the closest I can get is just it's missing that edge factor. Overall, the game definitely feels, honestly, like a solid 3 out of 5 game. But as a big fan of the series, it's nice to see the game having charm and love put into it again after so long. And it's still a delightful experience, even if overall it's a pretty standard experience. With that said, I think that this game should be the base level for a Mario and Luigi game. I don't think that any game going forward should be worse than this game is, which isn't to say that this game is bad. It's not. There's a lot of really great things about this game, and especially because it was the team's first time making a Mario and Luigi game, I think they did a great job. And time will tell, but I think I enjoyed it about as much as Dream Team, which is, of the first 4 games, my least favorite. Even as time has passed, I think I enjoyed Dream Team more, just because even Dream Team kind of had some of that special sauce, you know? But I think if they work out some of the kinks with the systems, improve the performance issues, which will hopefully not be an issue at all, because it'll hopefully be on the next system, and just bring in some of the old stuff that was missing from this game, I feel like they could really do a great job with the next game. And at this point, I have no doubt that there will be another game. I just also hope that it looks different than this one, because that was a big issue that happened after Dream Team. Like I mentioned, Paper Jam just used a lot of the same assets, and those assets weren't made for Paper Jam, which Paper Jam was boring on its own, but that definitely didn't help. Even if they go back and remake Partners in Time in this engine, which I think would be great. I think Partners in Time needs a remake. As much as I love it, it has a lot of things that can be fixed. I really hope that they change the character models and art style and stuff to make it look like Partners in Time and not like Brothership. For one, because I don't want these other games to reuse an art style lazily. I want them to put in the effort to make their own art style. But also because I want Brothership to have this distinct look in the series, because it has merit as it is. It's a great game. It really is. I just think that it could be better. But I'm overjoyed that the series has come back as strong as it has. Even if I am saying that I don't like it as much as the older games, I enjoyed my time with it thoroughly through the entire game. I'm not convinced it would hook new players to the series, but if you like the series already, then you'll definitely like it. And I'm definitely going to revisit it in the future. I'd say it's a delightful 3 out of 5 game. And that's okay. Not every game has to be perfect for me to enjoy it thoroughly. It was definitely one of my favorite games I played this year, even if I wouldn't describe it as the best game I played this year. Not even close. There were so many great games this year. It's very hard to... It's a very, very difficult spot to fight for. But yeah, definitely check it out if you've played the older games. And even if you haven't, it's a great game to play. Just play Bowser's Inside Story afterwards.